Okay, we're ready to go.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome all committee members, staff, and guests to the March 24th, 2025 Haldeman Norfolk Health and Social Services Advisory Meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that our meetings are web streamed. And with that, I call the March 24th, 2025 Haldeman Norfolk Health and Social Services Advisory Meeting to order. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none? Additions to the agenda? Are there any additions? I don't see any. Presentations and deputations? There are none. Adoption of advisory committee meeting minutes. May I have a motion to approve the Haldeman Norfolk Health and Social Services Advisory Meeting minutes from February the 24th, 2025 meeting? May I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Van Passen, seconded by Councillor Metcalf. All in favor of that motion? And that is carried. Thank you. Update on reports. I think Mr. Nolan, do you have an update on any reports? No.
Just took a second. Good morning, everybody. Yes, just an update that all the reports have went ahead as processed through council, leading up to today.
Oh, thank you very much. Consent items. Are there any consent items? Seeing none, we'll move on to staff reports. That's 7.1 Social Services and Housing, 7.1.1 HSS 24005 Homelessness Prevention Program, HPP Review. Louise, could you introduce the consultants, please?
Good morning. Through the chair to the advisory committee, thank you so much for having us again this morning to present report HSS-25-005. Just to provide a little bit of context for this report, and then I'm going to yield as much time as I can back to my colleagues who are going to present the findings. The budget for the housing prevention portfolio was increased in June of 2023, and we brought a report recommending that we do a system review again of the portfolio to make sure that there was confidence in the direction that the work was going in. The last time we had done a review of the portfolio was in 2016, and there was extensive recommendations made at that time that we had been implementing and continue to implement ongoing and up until this review was requested. So with that, I will pass it over to Jesse and Jillian, our consultants from Help Seeker, who will present the findings from their review of the Homeless Prevention Program portfolio. Thanks, ladies.
Thanks, Louise, and forgive me, I'm a little bit sick this morning, so bear with me. All good. That's the good thing about virtual. Jill, if I could ask you to share your screen, that would be great. So good morning, I'm Jessie Donaldson. We work for Help Seeker. Thanks, Louise, for the introduction. And so the last year, we've had the privilege of reviewing your system, looking over some of the data, and we're going to share some of those findings with you today. So first, we're going to share what we've learned about your system strengths. We're going to share some of the challenges and opportunities. But first, I just want to introduce you to some of the kind of the context of what we're seeing in regards to housing and homelessness across the province. Next slide, please, Jill. Awesome. So you may have seen this information. I had the privilege of working on an AMO project Ontario-wide to enumerate homelessness, and thank you, Louise, for your participation in that as well. The data was crucial. And what we're seeing throughout the province since 2024 especially is huge increases in homelessness, or what we anticipate over the next kind of 10 years. Most optimistically is that we'll actually see 128,000 people experiencing homelessness. And again, that doesn't factor in any kind of socioeconomic crises, which we seem to be in now. Least optimistically, we're expecting up to 300,000 people experiencing homelessness across the province. So what that kind of means in your context is your most recent enumeration found 117 people experiencing homelessness, and that's just on a single night. And more people are homeless as people move in and out through the year, and that's a 48% increase from the previous count, which was done in 2018. Based on projections, current kind of trajectory, what we can anticipate is homelessness may reach up to 150, your point in time count, by 2026, based on current trends. part of the increase in your PIC count was better outreach methods, which is great, but also undeniably does indicate increased demand. And I show this to you not to be sort of fatalistic or sensationalist, but really that what we're facing is an increased pressure, increased population growth. And so the onus and the necessity of building up our systems, as you've done, we'll show you today, to respond to this demand is essential. Next slide, please. What was also interesting, or interesting is hardly the right word, but concerning, is we actually see rural homelessness. And again, this is the Ontario-wide data, but we're seeing it reflected in your data as well. Rural homelessness is increasing at a faster rate than non-rural, than urban homelessness. And this doesn't even factor in the number of people who have to leave rural communities in order to access services. So we actually saw a 154% increase since 2022 in rural homelessness, which is much faster, and tells us, as you all know, homelessness is not a kind of big city issue, and many of these pressures that rural communities, including yours, are facing will continue to be relevant over the coming years. Next slide, please. A few trends what we're seeing. So we're seeing huge pressures on housing supply. We had the lowest housing starts, decrease in housing starts over the last year that we've seen since pre-COVID. We're also seeing population growth, and of course, not at a super fast rate within your community, but still enough to put strain on essential services and infrastructure. We're also seeing an increased and more complex need. So people more likely to have co-occurring mental health and substance disorders. We're seeing significant trauma in youth post-COVID mental health. And so that will carry on and continue to be more complex. So not only more people are needing help, but the types of help they need, the level of staff support and intervention is increasing, and that puts a burden on both your capital and your infrastructure costs as we have to come up with new models on how to respond to issues. We're also seeing economic pressures that you can't escape the news right now about how we're being impacted with the tariffs. And really, we're only now in kind of a post-COVID recovery as far as economics go. And now we're seeing significant likelihood of a downturn, which has huge impacts for years to come on social issues. The way our social issues respond to economic crises are much slower and much more consequential than that kind of quicker economic cycles we see. We're also seeing huge increases in infrastructure costs, as you know. So building housing, operating housing, homelessness models, and that's going to continue to impact you as a region. However, you cannot control many of these things, which means that you have to look at the levers of what you can control within a system, some of which you're controlling very well. We've seen some really great outcomes in your system, but how do you continue to build up and fortify what you can control in your system to insulate you to some extent to some of these headwinds, if you will. And we'll go to slide 6, please. There's also huge local pressures. And so what we're seeing locally for you and through the review is mimicking what we're seeing externally. So limited affordable housing supply. We're seeing an increased cost of living, which is making it very difficult for families and communities. Increased rates of poverty, food bank usage, transportation costs and lack of transportation is a hugely limiting factor for employment and school and quality of health, but also housing and other barriers to access specifically relevant to you as a rural community. And of course, like many communities, mental health and substance use and addictions, and a lack of treatment and support within your community and across the province for those issues. Jillian, I'll turn it to you. Oh, are you on mute, maybe?
I am. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me now? Okay, lovely. Awesome. And so I guess in the vein of, what municipalities can and can't control, really the homeless serving system is where a lot of your leverage point lies. And so Really, to be effective in 2025, homelessness systems really need to function like well-oiled machines. And so while you can't always control the number of people who are going to be experiencing homelessness or sort of the inflow of people that might be needing that support, what you can control is how are you designing that system? How are you resourcing it? How are you coordinating it to make sure that every piece of the puzzle is working like a well-oiled machine and towards common goals? This is super important because it gives you the ability to not only have sort of transparency onto what your homelessness system of care is, but also really make sure that all of those pieces are working well together. And I do believe that based on the data that we've reviewed, that Haldeman and Norfolk truly do have a very strong foundation for this. Of course, the homelessness prevention program manages quite a larger budget in the 23-24 year than it did in the 22-23 year. We believe that's for the better. And truly, when we look at sort of the history of these programs and how they've transitioned sort of accountability, how they've transitioned to working with more staff or less staff at certain times, I think that the current infrastructure and the current supports in place have really just demonstrated a lot of creativity and a lot of really, I think, results to be able to stand behind what it is that you do. As far as a couple of bright spots that I'd like to draw your attention to, first is really the housing assistance programs. And so these supports are financial supports for individuals who aren't necessarily experiencing homelessness yet, but are at risk. And so think of these as individuals who might be at risk of being evicted, who are on the brink of homelessness, and the ability to access either an ongoing payment or, in the case of the Housing Stability Bank, sort of a one-time payment to help with something like your last month's rent, to help with something like your utility arrears, is a tremendous support to those individuals. And I think that when you look at the fact that just about 91% of households who accessed the Housing Stability Bank program remained housed a year after receiving that support, really speaks to the power of that prevention. And so for every household that you are supporting through those programs, such as the Housing Stability Bank, you're preventing people from sort of cycling into that system of needing more complex support, of having escalating crises. And so this is truly, I think, something that the program can stand on as a success. Of course, for programs where that's not necessarily possible, there is emergency programs that the department does offer. So that includes the Jarvis Star Motel emergency housing program there, as well as the Seasonal Warming Center in Simcoe. This is temporary stays for individuals who are looking for that support, and then also very involved supports as far as providing basic needs, meals. They work with housing support workers to try to encourage self-resolution, but then also get people connected to the right supports that they need. And so whether that is helping individuals with, mediation with their landlords, advocacy, access to other community resources, this is truly another lever of success that the program has. And, when you look at sort of the rates that the EHP is able to demonstrate in terms of how successful they are in getting people placed into stable housing, it's at a 33% success rate right now. And I don't have the data today to sort of speak to all the other municipalities in Ontario, but what I can tell you sort of anecdotally is that 33% success rate is incredibly high for emergency shelter programs and being able to place individuals in there. I think so many municipalities right now are really struggling with, where do we put these individuals? Is there enough supports in place? And I think the ability of this department to have such high success rates in getting people out of those emergency situations into a safe place to live is really something to stand on and be proud of. And then, of course, sort of looking to supportive housing and transitional housing, again, really high success rates there too. And so this is individuals who are accessing longer term supports. Think about case management, life skills, counseling, dedicated teams, clinical staff with them. And, the programs have sort of changed and grown over the years. But I think what's really consistent that we've seen with these programs is, the fact that you're able to maintain such high success rates in keeping people housed, in keeping people in those supports over longer terms. That is really, I think, a big success point for you. And of course, those are incredibly cost-effective investments. If you've ever looked at some of the numbers around, sort of what it costs to respond to an emergency through police, through emergency rooms, through crisis response teams versus sort of the investment that you can offer up front for those individuals who do need supportive housing, tremendous difference. And so, again, I think another bright spot for the HPP. And those programs, I think, really, when you put them together, prove how well the system's working, especially when it is properly resourced and coordinated. Of course, that's not something that sort of comes out of nowhere. I think it truly is a product of being able to work with the resources that they do have, the staff that we spoke with, and looking at sort of the diversity of roles that each of them play across each of these programs. Isn't an accident. It really is the result of all of these staff and these resources working across the programs to form a solid foundation. And so, with the outreach that they're doing, with the sort of hands-on one-on-one support that they're offering to clients, the question now isn't necessarily how do you start to change that tremendously, but how do you start to build on that success of the strong program metrics that you're seeing, as well as the strong base of staff that you do see. As far as limitations for the review, there's a lot of data that we did have to work from when crafting this report. Of course, one of the limitations here is just in sort of what data is available. Now, some of that's natural because there's just simply things that your department wasn't tracking before. But I think that having some visibility into the future of how do we continue to make sure that these programs are working like a well-oiled machine? How do we make sure that we are tracking sort of longer term outcomes as opposed to sort of just, how many people are being served through something is super, super important. And when you think about sort of, this isn't just data for data's sake, but it is a really essential planning tool so that the next time your community decides that it needs to ask for grants or funding or more resources, you don't want to run a marathon and then find at the end of the day that your shoelace is broken. So that data piece is and the ability to manage your performance, track your performance, have the evidence behind it, really is like that shoelace that's sort of holding you together through the race. And so I do think that there's a lot of strengths and a lot of bright spots that the HPP shows, and that with some targeted investment into the resources and sort of into the administrative infrastructure, that can go a long way for enabling your community to continue to support these individuals. Of course, there's a couple of pressure points that do sort of form the reasons why there's some of those limitations. One of them is just resources and admin capacity. At the time we were writing this report, I know that there were some pretty stringent caps on sort of how much of the total budget could be used towards things like data tracking or things like planning. And so I think that just continuing to build up that capacity for the department is super critical to its success, especially in the long term. And I think that, again, while you do have a lot of strong data to start on, we know that sort of a lot of communities are really starting to amp up this capacity. And so in order for you to sort of stay up to date and make sure that you're competing on a strong basis for that limited pot of resources that's available, these are some places where I think a little bit of investment can go a long way for the system. Okay, over to you, Jessie.
Thanks, Jill. Pardon me. What we've also seen is huge increases across Ontario in investments in homelessness and housing via the municipalities. And of course, we can argue that it's not the municipality's mandate. And of course, having to top that up is problematic in regards to how we work with our other government partners, but we also know is there will be no major funding changes, likely to be no major funding changes from the provincial government over the next few years. And so really this is born out of necessity. And based on our review, it appears that you are the only service manager who doesn't have the additional municipal top-up in homelessness investments. And so it's remarkable what you've been able to do with your staff, and kudos to the performance of the system. And so we really think there's an opportunity insofar as propping up kind of the homelessness system and being prepared for the coming headwinds over the next several years, about how additional investment, even small amounts of investment, might really support or amplify administrative capacity, data capacity, as well as performance of the system overall, and allow you to be much more nimble in your responsiveness to these kind of changing trends and how they might be impacting you locally. Next slide, please. And I'll be brief here. I know we're over time. So our sort of operational recommendations based on kind of a detailed review and looking at other service managers for you is, one, to boost administrative and performance tracking infrastructure. And that's essential not only for maintaining nimbleness and responsiveness, but also for advocacy, because there's a lot of service managers investing quite a bit in that and able to make the case for increased investment. So as those new opportunities do come up, how are you best positioned to maximizing and capitalize on those? Further to that is maximizing HIFIS integration, and then measuring outcomes. And of course, we were able to show you some of those outcomes today. Doing so with increased investment would allow you to make that case even stronger. And then this is the game for the rest of our time here, is strengthening the housing continuum, but really looking at kind of the homelessness portfolio and the prevention portfolio as essential part of strengthening that crisis and preventative response. Just very briefly, I really wanted to thank you, congratulate the system that you have built, particularly with some of the infrastructure challenges you have. And there are a lot of bright spots. And so I just commend you on that. And we bring these operational recommendations and suggestions in good faith, in hopes that they'll positively impact some of the other priorities you have in the community.
Lovely. Thank you, Jessie. And just if we can leave you with one thing, I think that it truly is an achievement for your department to have built such a continuum of care that's shown success across so many areas, especially in that prevention. You know, your emergency housing program is moving people into housing at rates that I think a lot of larger systems would envy. The amount sort of ability of your department to get ahead of crises before they're happening, you know, with that supportive housing, with those financial supports, is something, again, a strength of the community. And just you know, I think that with, again, so many of the forces in your community that you can't control, economically, socially, you can control sort of how this system operates and how you want to resource and how you want to plan it. And so again, lots of really strong foundations for the HPP to build off of. Our job here has really been to sort of identify those signals for you, identify some of those strengths and those opportunities for improvement. And we hope that this presentation is helpful in helping you make some of those decisions going forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation today. With that, I'm going to get questions on the table. I see one. Thank you, Councillor Metcalf. Also, I have a question, just maybe this is for staff. For the Jarvis Star Motel, it has 15 spaces. How is the sale of that property going to affect our emergency housing?
Thank you, Mayor Bentley. Through the chair to you to answer your question, the sale will not be impacting us. We have been waiting for this report to come to council to enter into a long-term contract. And it's my understanding that the new owners are prepared to enter into a contract with us when we're ready.
Fantastic. That's wonderful news. And then the numbers that you have in your report, do these include the numbers from victim services? I know that they are an integral part in our system for after hours. So, or are there numbers in addition to the numbers that you provide in this report.
Louise, please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. The emergency housing program does have some coordination with victim services, but ultimately those do operate sort of under separate jurisdiction, and so they would have their own reporting process. So I would imagine that if you wanted to see some of those data, it would be through victim services.
Appreciate that. Thank you. With that, we have Councillor Metcalf has his hand up. Go ahead, please. Oh, you got to unmute, John.
Yeah, I was hitting my face where the unmute was, but it's changed here. Just when I know the answers, they change the questions with computers and phones. Great presentation, ladies. That was my question was, I've noticed that the Star Motel was, had a for sale sign on it. And I was just wondering how that was going to impact because for years, I know that housing has been using that as a spot for some of the homeless involved. So good news to hear that they plan on keeping that contract with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Louise, do you want to go next? I see that your hand's up there.
Through the chair, yes, thank you. I just wanted to comment on Jillian's answer about victim services and how they interact and interplay with us. So victim services does offer the after-hours services for the emergency housing program, but with respect to what it looks like from a data perspective as far as our intakes and or our exits from emergency housing, that data is through us. So whatever placements are being made in the after hours are being captured in our intake information that's relevant and tracked and so on and so forth. What I can tell you is we have very few after hours placements, especially during the season when the warming center is open. More people tend to just use the warming center because they can drop in versus accessing victim services for an assessment, which is a little bit more fulsome as far as the diversion piece of whether you actually need the assistance in the after hours. So the data is included is sort of what my short answer is.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know we've had a few fires as Norfolk has as well, but Haldeman County, I know that I get responses from those folks that have had a tragic house fire and, they've been put in to housing into a motel through victim services. And they're in the city because there isn't any availability out our way. So thank you for that. Next up is Councillor Van Rishi.
Thank you. Yeah. Getting an echo.
We can't hear you, Councillor. Sorry.
It's not going to work because we're going to get the echo, I think.
No,
maybe type it in the chat box and I can.
We can hear you pretty well.
Okay, you can hear me okay? I just had a couple of questions. Maybe I can get them in. You indicated that we have a 33% sex rate. And then you mentioned that we don't have the municipal top-ups. So how do we go about getting those municipal top-ups?
That would, I guess that depends whether the lever is looking at your own resources and your long-term financial plan, or whether it's an advocacy position. But of course, getting those top-ups from an advocacy position right now with the provincial government is not, there's really not a lot of room for that currently in the policy system. And so really it would be looking to your own internal financial structures and how you might be able to provide additional funding to that response. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Linda.
Oh, you're welcome.
Next up is Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've argued for years that we don't have a homelessness problem in Haldeman, Norfolk. We have, or in my opinion, we have a mental health problem. We have an addiction problem with drugs, an addiction problem with alcohol, maybe an eyesight problem that people don't see themselves working. And we are always treating the symptom of that, which is the homelessness. And I think staff are doing a pretty decent job of making that shift to try to get more of the resources into the actual sources of the problem. But are we doing that well enough, or is there more room for improvement on dealing with the actual problems rather than the symptoms of the problems?
I appreciate that. And homelessness really represents a multi-system failure. It's the measure for how you're doing in health, in prevention, in education. And two, you as municipality and county, again, you don't have control over some of those. You don't have control that there's been huge cuts in Ministry of Health and supportive housing units. And so on the one hand, absolutely. But on the other hand, people will always be experiencing homelessness. That's an unfortunate reality, and that will continue. And so how I think your team is doing an incredible job with the very limited resources they have in reducing some of that impact and preventing that kind of small people who are most at risk. But I do agree. There's proportional investments needed elsewhere in the system, and you're not going to be able to do all of that through your service manager role. It's just simply not possible. And so what can you do to kind of insulate your system really is the question.
Well,
Thank you.
Keep arguing, and maybe I get in trouble for this, but the bottom of the socioeconomic scale, by definition, will always be there. It's a lot better than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago. And like the supportive housing thing, that is it better to get more resources in to help somebody pay their rent so that they don't drop into the bottom of the socioeconomic scale? And are those dollars better used that way rather than dealing with them after they've fallen over the cliff? Are we doing enough that way?
Yeah, there's always, thank you through the chair, apologies, full of vinegar this morning. Absolutely. That's kind of the age-old question. With limited resources, where do you prioritize the burning building or to prevent the next one from burning? But of course, keeping people in their housing is the most cost-effective, but also ethical, as a community ethical thing, is keeping them in housing they have, particularly when you have so little housing to begin with.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to Councillor Duffy, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I think differently than Councillor Passon, so I guess maybe I would ask, because my understanding always was that sort of if you look at the social determinants of health, housing was sort of always at the core of it, was at the base. And so I guess I'm maybe looking to you to help me understand if that is still the case, or if we're seeing that is now shifting. I always, my interpretation previously was that, if you lose housing, that's when you start to go down, you lose that sense of yourself. So therefore you start perhaps with addiction. So therefore but you also don't have access to the same degree of healthcare, which just spirals. But I guess maybe I would look to you for the expert advice on that. Is that still the case, or are we seeing it changing?
Certainly. I feel like I have a non-argument or non-response on my account is yes, you need it all. Absolutely, housing is core, and you also have a kind of a growing and urgent crisis in regards to substance use and mental health, which is a cause and consequence of no housing, and will continue to have kind of safety impacts and community impacts. So it's a yes, and it's really, as a community, where do you make your bet? Really, unfortunately, with a few resources, and it seems to be some of the prevention programs you have are quite effective in that kind of diversionary aspect. But until you have increased housing overall, you're going to continue to see the growing pressure and need within your homelessness response system, irregardless of the socioeconomic conditions that we're facing.
I like the cause and consequence. That helps to frame it for me. Okay, thank you. Next question. One of the things that I hear somewhat frequently from folks in the industry and across our community, one of the challenges that we face is that we don't have, and my apologies if I missed it at the beginning, I'm sorry I was late, I was in another meeting. We don't have the same or perhaps the desired level of access to day programming, including other supports that would come with that. So not just sort of access to showers and all of that sort of stuff, but the support wraparound system that would go with it. Any comment on that?
Jillian, do you want to take that one? Or Louise?
Sure, and I'll defer to you a little bit, Louise, here. As far as the programs that we reviewed, I think the closest things to day programs, if you will, that you'd see in here is the emergency housing program, and so that includes the seasonal warming center and those individuals who are staying at the Star Motel. I do know that sort of through those hotel rooms, they do have things like access to showers. I know that there's partnerships with the food banks in place. And so those are supports that are available. And of course, I know that lots of the housing support workers, for example, are well versed in sort of referrals to community partners who also provide those services. But Louise, I'll let you jump in here for a little bit of context too.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair. One of the challenges for sure in our continuum and on our system is other resources in the community beyond what we staff and provide. So in order to have a comprehensive system, it also has to have partners that are willing to come to the table and provide their own either in-kind or collaboration and cooperation to provide services where they're the experts in that subject matter. So for example, where we need addiction and or mental health supports to complement homelessness outreach, for example, to provide something during the day or that kind of thing, then there has to be partners coming to the table. We've done a couple of RFPs over the years for that type of work and a suggestion. So we haven't even prescribed what it is that we're looking for. We've given our partners the opportunity to come forward and say, we really think we have a service that can help. And we don't get any response to those RFPs. And we have reached out anecdotally, like just, when there's time and when there's been capacity, we've reached out to start to have some conversations as recently as in the last month or two around the Heart Hub funding that came forward and the ability to put an application forward and or how to partner with services. And I think all of our partners are lacking human capacity to do all of the things that we need to do to both meet our own core mandates in our organizations, in addition to then collaborating on a project that serves everybody but isn't anybody's core mandate. So I hope that's not a confusing answer. What I would say is I think we are all lacking capacity in Haldimand and Norfolk just because of the small scale of our programs and our agencies. There aren't 5 and 6 and 7 mental health programs. There aren't 5 and 6 and 7 addiction programs. We probably only have one key partner in most of those areas, and they're equally strapped as we are with trying to meet core mandates.
Thank you.
In their defense.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense to me. Is there regular and ongoing dialogue? Because I guess I question sort of what our role would be within that. But is there also regular and ongoing dialogue to talk about what the needs are, and avenues to try and deliver those amongst the providers locally?
Yeah, through the chair, I can tell you that there is no dedicated housing and homelessness table that is convened and able to meet regularly at the moment. Again, we've certainly tried. There are struggles with capacity that other priorities pull us away from being able to do that on a regular basis. We do participate in other advisory planning groups like justice related or, coordinated care related, things like that. So there is conversation happening. Is it always focused on housing and homelessness as a core problem? No.
Okay, thank you.
Do I see any further questions? Seeing none, I'd like to thank Jesse and Jillian for coming back to present again today. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Thank you, Louise, for everything that you do. We appreciate all the hard work into the homelessness and prevention program. So thank you again, and I will move on to adjournment then.
Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you. So may I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn at 10:09 a.m., please? Moved by Councillor Metcalf, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Van Passen.
Do we want a motion to accept the report as information before we adjourn?
Oh, sure, we can do that. Before we adjourn, can I have a motion to accept the report?
I'd be happy
Sorry
to move
about
that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Van Passen. Seconded by Councillor Van Riche. All in favor? Thank you. That's carried. Thank you. Move to adjourn, please. Can I have a mover and a second to adjourn at 10:10 a.m.? Moved by Councillor Metcalf, seconded by Councillor Duthie. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.